Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Morning Coffee. It is Wednesday, the 17th of February. We are gaining almost 6 minutes a day of daylight in Alaska right now, and that makes my heart happy. Morning, staff. Thank you for joining us. We have students who've come on Morning Coffee to join us today. Good morning, Miss Beyondich.
Good morning, Principal Mokelke.
How are things at the facility today?
It is quiet here today, but there's a few staff members here with me, and we're excited for morning coffee with Dr. Guise.
Is that a low-key jab, Mrs. Beyondich? It's quiet. Why is it quieter in the building today?
So the guy who has the office across the hall from me.
I've heard that guy is kind of loud. We have an incredible morning coffee today. I'm so excited. First, I do want to share that Anchorage STrEAM Academy empowers students to be involved learners, critical thinkers, and engaged citizens who are inspired by the natural world. We go outside every day at STrEAM Academy. It's been so nice having students back in the building to go outside with. On the agenda today, we'll give you some updates on important things that are happening, talk about upcoming future morning coffees. Mrs. Beyondich will give us an update from the 501c3, our nonprofit arm. As promised, each Wednesday, we touch base on Q4 plans and options and what's happening in Q4. But the highlight of today and the bulk of morning coffee time today really is dedicated to a special guest, Dr. Holly Guise. And Dr. Guise is back with us today to talk about a topic she is an expert on, Elizabeth Peratrovich. And that's super exciting. We're really excited about that. So that's what's on tap for today. Next week, we have an outdoor education focus on morning coffee. We have Aaron Kirkland with Anchorage Parks coming on with Miss Gatlin to talk about outdoor opportunities in Anchorage. And our 8th grade team, Miss Goodman and Mrs. Smith will be here. Also on next week, we have our virtual open house night. And then no school on Friday the 5th. We have morning coffee that week though, right? Yeah, that'd be Friday. That would be Wednesday the 3rd. We have morning coffee. Friday the 5th is no school, spring break begins, and then Q4 begins on the 15th of March. So just to touch base each week on our Q4 plans, at our last meeting, the APC approved our plan for Q4, which is a little bit different than the rest of the district. So we want to keep this messaging, keep putting this messaging out there. The first week of Q4, starting Monday, March 15th, our teachers will be in the building. We'll teach from the facility on Zoom. Students will stay home that first week. That gives our teachers that transition time to be fully in the building, working and settling in. And it also gives us a buffer coming off spring break because people travel and they do things, and there could be a spike and a need for, even if there's not a need for anyone who traveled, students or teachers or staff, to quarantine. And so we've got this nice buffer that our APC approved for us to do the first week of Q4 online. And then we're back. On Monday, the 22nd, we will have our students back in the building face-to-face 4 days a week. Wednesdays will stay a virtual working Wednesday. Teachers will teach on Zoom on Wednesdays for all of their students. Their students who stay virtual in our hybrid program, and their students who are in person. They'll all attend Zoom classes on Wednesdays. And we'll keep that virtual buffer in the middle of the week, that working Wednesday. I want to remind our families, you do not have to return in person if you're not ready. You don't have to return until you're ready. And so we have we have a list compiled of students that are choosing to stay virtual, and we think we've got everybody. It's about 10 students in our school who are choosing to do their classes, the same classes they would do, whatever classes they're rolling into for fourth quarter with the same teachers. Just they'll continue to do those by doing the assignments that are on Canvas and following those lessons and submitting their work from home. So if you are a family who is considering that or planning on not coming into the building, please make sure you're on our list. Most likely we've already talked to you if you're on the list, but if you haven't heard from us or talked to me or Ms. Beyondich, you haven't heard a solid, yes, we've got you scheduled to be hybrid, virtual, please let us know. So that's our updates and important information. And what we really want to get to right away is to talk to our special guest today. Yesterday was Elizabeth Peratrovich Day in Alaska. It's a very special day commemorating a really important figure in our history of our state. And we have with us a special guest, Dr. Holly Guise, to talk about this topic, to talk about Elizabeth Peratrovich. Dr. Guise is an assistant professor of history at the University of New Mexico. She's from Alaska. She's a Nupiaq. She's born and raised in Anchorage, and her family is originally from Unalakleet. Dr. Guise teaches courses on Native history, gender history, Pacific history, histories of captivity and incarceration, and oral history. And she is here with us for the second time, a repeat guest, a returning guest, this time to talk about her research and her work, including a chapter in a book that we have in our library at STrEaM called Suffrage at 100, a chapter she wrote on Elizabeth Peratrovich. Good morning, Dr. Guise. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me here today. It's really great to be invited back by STrEaM Academy and Principal Mokelke. So thank you for the warm introduction and for having me back. I'm really excited. I'm also glad to continue this celebration of Elizabeth Peratrovich today, right? Like, I think it's important that we recognize the importance of Elizabeth Peratrovich Day, Native activism, and also continue the celebration. So thank you for that.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us and continuing the celebration with us. And we're really excited to talk to you. We actually have some students who've joined us and a lot more, I think, probably watching on our YouTube channel because several of our classes and our teachers, of course, are talking about and learning about Elizabeth Peratrovich. And they're excited to hear from you. So where do you want to start? What would you like to tell us to get us to sort of dive into the awesome work that you've done on Elizabeth Peratrovich?
That's a great question. Thank you for thank you for posing that question. So in terms of Elizabeth Peratrovich, honestly, when I was attending the Anchorage School District, went to West Anchorage High School, I never actually learned about Elizabeth Peratrovich in school. So I see this really fantastic trend where I think we're talking more about Elizabeth Peratrovich Day. We're celebrating the day. We have kind of this new coin that came out from the US Mint, opposite of Sacagawea. So there's kind of some really exciting ways in which Elizabeth Peratrovich is kind of forward facing and like reaching a national audience at this point, right? So it's really great that we're talking more about her in terms of being a civil rights activist, but also as a Native rights activist. So what I find interesting, being a historian, I've kind of looked at these primary documents. Primary documents would be letters, journals, photographs, things in the archives. And I basically put those together with previously written works, letters, not letters, but previously written works like journal articles, books, things like that. And I piece together what the historical era looks like. And one of the things I find interesting is there's been a focus on Elizabeth Peratrovich as a civil rights leader, but she also is a Native rights leader. We have to look at the Alaska Native Brotherhood and the Alaska Native Sisterhood in terms of their organizational structure and how they were fighting for equality at that time, but they were also fighting for Aboriginal land rights. So I think we also need to include that discussion of protecting Native land rights during that time too. So more than just civil rights. In terms of
I like that. I like that perspective, Dr. Guise, because I think Elizabeth Peratovich's the work that she did and that movement set up the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act some 20 years later. So I'm glad that you touched on that.
Yeah, definitely. So we can see how this activism from the 40s is kind of propelling into the mid 20th century. And in theme with that, the other thing I wanted to say is Elizabeth Peratrovich continues a legacy of Native activism, right? So another thing I've seen commonly in the news is there's kind of this way in which she's framed as a civil rights activist, like a couple decades before the 60s. And I think that's kind of an incorrect framing because that also erases civil rights narratives that predated the 60s, even into the late 19th century with like Ida B. Wells, who was a Black activist who was opposed to lynching laws, right? So there's kind of several activists who predate Martin Luther King. So I see Elizabeth Peratrovich as a continuation of activists from the early 20th century and also through the 19th century. So I think we also just need to be cognizant that activism has always kind of continued, but it doesn't diminish the role that these important kind of historical actors played.
Thank you for, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I remember the last time you were on, you talked about the Nome sit-in, the Nome Theater sit-in. And so again, these themes connect and intersect in that way.
Definitely. I guess I can chat briefly about the piece I wrote. So I wrote this piece in Suffragette 100, and it's about Elizabeth Peratrovich and her activism with the Alaska Native Sisterhood. And one of the reasons I wrote it is I was kind of looking at the literature in the field, and I thought we really need more about the Alaska Native Sisterhood, right? Because we have kind of a number of publications about the Alaska Native Brotherhood or focused on the more fraternal organization. I actually really, really like this book, Peter Metcalf's A Dangerous Idea. But I think there's only a couple pages about the Alaska Native Sisterhood, right? And so I was thinking, what can we add, or what's our understanding of the Alaska Native Sisterhood? What forms of activism do they participate in? And when I was looking through the archive, I spent time researching at the Sealaska Heritage Institute in Juneau before it became the Walter Soboleff building. So I spent time at the Sealaska Heritage Institute looking through the records. And what I found was that the Alaska Native Sisterhood was very much engaged in activism, but primarily in what we would identify as domestic spaces, right? So like homes, home life, how can we find resources for Native families, healthcare, education. And these are all really powerful these are all powerful realms that impact Native families and impact Native lives. And so I wanted this piece to really center Elizabeth Peratrovich and also the power of Native women, kind of creating alliances and making productive spaces in the domestic realm that actually did carry power. So for example, Cecilia Kuntz, who was a member of the Alaska Native Sisterhood, talks about how she remembers that the women of the Alaska Native Sisterhood reached out to the presses in Juneau and told them not to publish the names of Native juveniles who were arrested by the police, right? So kind of protecting their identity and making sure that they were treated equal to white youth in Juneau. And that's powerful, right? So in terms of protecting children and protecting community, the domestic sphere is a very powerful place. And I think during the pandemic, where we're all kind of home-based, we realize how powerful the home is too, right? And in terms of home improvement projects, like why that's so valuable and why it's important.
Thank you, definitely. Tell us, Dr. Guise, tell us about the time leading up to and then the votes. I don't know, I guess an important piece I got from your work that I don't think I knew was that the Alaska Civil Rights Act was voted on and not passed a year prior, or the anti-discrimination law was voted on and not passed once. And then tell us about that time from the legislature not passing the anti-discrimination law to the vote in 1945, and of course the sort of the famous speech that Elizabeth Peratrovich gave. Can you give us a little glimpse into history and how that all played out?
Sure. Yep. So you're spot on. The act failed to pass in 1943. And it really, like, the House passed it. I think it was 19-5, it basically encountered resistance from the Senate. And so it failed to pass in 1943. And really, it only passed in 1945 because of Native activism and Native activists creating alliances with non-Natives as well, right? To kind of propel movement to make the act pass. So for example, in 1944, Governor Greening, I think it's 1944, 1944, Governor Greening visited the annual convention of the Alaska Native Brotherhood and the Alaska Native Sisterhood. Also in 1944, the ANB and ANS at the annual convention passed a resolution called discrimination, where they as a community were going to try to end this discrimination together. So we really have kind of critical mobilizers in the Native community creating a grassroots network, right, to make sure that this act passes in 1945. And so then in 1945, we come to that time period. This is another, I have all these books on my desk. This book right here is really fantastic. It's called Our Culture, and it's based on oral histories with Nora Dowenhauer and Richard Dowenhauer, the late Dowenhauer couple. And it actually prints the official Senate record of what happened in 1945 on the Senate floor. And so it basically has quotes from each senator talking about forms of discrimination that they hold, and also Elizabeth Peratrovich speech. So I think it's really, you probably can't read this, but I did want to share that I think it's really great that some books even have the official Senate record printed in it, right?
That's amazing. Last time after your last visit, Dr. Guise, we purchased, I think, 5 books for the STrEAM library. So we, Mrs. Smith says 7. We purchased 7 books after your last visit. So please continue to share with us your recommendations and the literature we should have on hand so that we can educate ourselves and our students, because we love it. We'll follow up with your new reading list after this visit also.
That's awesome. I'm so glad. Thank you. I'm glad that the books are reaching a larger audience, and these are really fantastic books. A lot of them are published by University of Alaska Press and University of Washington Press, so kind of Pacific Northwest focus. So basically, Elizabeth Peratrovich kind of rises to the occasion, and she has this elocution where she speaks against these senators, kind of espousing terminology that would be racist rhetoric, right? Like the language that they are using seeks to create a racial hierarchy, in terms of some races being, quote, inferior to other races being, quote, superior, right? So she kind of rises to the occasion, and she uses the colonial language of basically saying, like, I would not have expected that I, who am barely out of savagery, would have to remind the gentlemen with 5,000 years of recorded civilization behind them of our Bill of Rights. So she's using kind of the language of democracy to advocate for Native rights and Native equality. And I think that that's really powerful, is reminding people what democracy means and how each person is kind of entitled to the rights of democracy, right?
Yeah, that's amazing, and that speech is so powerful, and it's really cool to get your perspective on it. What about after the anti-discrimination laws passed in 1945, and sort of the role that the Alaska Native Sisterhood and Elizabeth Peratrovich continued to play, just in to keep this march going forward? Yeah,
that's a great question. So what happens after the 1945 Alaska Equal Rights Act? Honestly, there are ways in which segregation continues. So I wish that there could be a law or statute that would actually kind of end discrimination, right? I think all of us kind of wish that. But what I found when I interviewed elders about this time period, when I was an undergrad in the year 2008 with a senior honors thesis, I'm digressing, but I'm getting to the point. What I found with interviewing elders is they talked about ways in which discrimination continued, even after the Alaska Equal Rights Act. Because if we look at the 1945 Alaska Equal Rights Act, it pertains specifically to Alaskan businesses, right? That doesn't have to do with with housing. It doesn't have to do with job discrimination, right? It doesn't have to, it's not related to the schools, right? We still have the separate school system with the Bureau of Indian Affairs. So there are ways in which Native activists are integrating some of the schools in Alaska throughout the 20th century, but really we don't see that kind of educational equality until like the Molly Hooch case in the 70s, right? So there's still ways that kind of Native activists have to continue to advocate for equality in all ways, shape, and forms.
That's great perspective. Thank you. If I remember correctly, Elizabeth Peratrovich was sort of spurred on initially by housing and school-based discrimination, right? Like some of the first issues that she tackled moving to Juneau, and we're being faced with that housing discrimination and faced with separate school systems.
Right. I think you're right about that in terms of identifying some of her main concern included housing discrimination, where Native people could live, where they could purchase a home, and also education. So at the beginning of this piece that I wrote, I incorporate an oral history interview I conducted with Bertrand Adams Sr. He's a Tlingit elder, and he also goes by his Tlingit name Kadashan because he's been a writer before for some newspapers down in Southeast Alaska. So Kadashan spoke with me in 2008, and he talked about how Elizabeth Peratrovich visited his house and met with his mother and pitched to his mother to integrate the schools in Juneau with her son, right? So we see Elizabeth Peratrovich also as a mobilizer within the community, connecting with Native families and trying to create alliances and also creating educational opportunities for other Native students beyond just her kids, right? So I think it's really important also to remember that she's a critical mobilizer for Native families at this time period.
Awesome, thank you. I want to make sure I give an opportunity to any of our staff or even any of our students who are on to ask Dr. Guise any questions. So you can jump in. Mrs. Smith, go ahead.
I was just typing this out, but I wasn't sure. I'm glad you opened the opportunity for asking. It's kind of a hard thing to type out. So I'm teaching World War II, and I've been thinking about since I created the class in December, like learning what I have learned through this with her and what's going on, particularly in 1944 and 1945, with her speeches and the movement and what she's talking about. How was Alaska able to move forward with that is kind of my big question, that I'm not finding enough information. When all of this was happening in the Pacific Theater and the focus of the nation was over there, and of course of the home front, there's this dichotomy, but particularly for minority groups with we're being told support the war effort, equality, democracy, but we're not being treated fairly. And certainly those movements were being brought about, but in other areas of the country, they weren't able to be brought closer to fruition for another like 10 years. But in Alaska, somehow the conditions were all, happening much quicker. So I just wonder about, what was she doing that got it going in her group in the sisterhood? If you could speak a little bit more to that.
That's a fantastic question. Like, what sets Alaska apart? How is Alaska unique from other parts of the country? Why Elizabeth Peratrovich? Why Alaska Natives, right? So I think you kind of hit the nail on the head with talking about this time period as being the World War II era, right? Like Alaska is basically the only territory that experienced land invasion during this time period, kind of in North America. And it was a censored war, right? So it was also people in the continental lower 48, if you will, didn't necessarily know about the war that was happening in Alaska and the invasion of the Aleutian Islands. In the piece I wrote for Indian Country Today, the opinion piece that was printed yesterday, I wanted to contextualize everything happening in Alaska at this time, because the segregation included not only segregation at businesses, but think of Japanese American exclusion, right? In terms of being put in relocation camps after Executive Order 9066, and also Aleut Unangan internment in Southeast Alaska. And when you also put into context that those who built the Alaska-Canadian Highway were segregated Black Americans in platoons, segregated platoons, we see all sorts of forms of segregation on the Alaskan home front during this time period, in terms of segregated units and also exclusion and relocation of certain populations, including Japanese, Alaskans, and also the Aleut. So wow, that's a lot going on. To think that that's all happening in Alaska in the 1940s, and that we have Native activists advocating to end kind of discrimination in public places like businesses, that's certainly a start, right? So it would kind of take a continued effort by activists of all backgrounds to kind of make sure that these forms of equality are recognized. And hopefully that stories like relocation don't continue to happen, right? Because one of the things with Aleut internment, when I was talking to my students last semester, Native people who are relocated don't always get to go back, right? There are Native people who are relocated to reservations, Oklahoma, right, where they don't ever get to return back to Georgia or their ancestral Native homelands. So that's another thing to think about. So this historical contingency where anything can and will happen, right? So Alaska is very much part of this historical contingency. A lot is happening. It's an active war zone. And we happen to have a political figure, Governor Greening, who is pretty progressive. Okay, he's pretty progressive. My understanding of Greening is that he was from New York State, and that his family had a history of being involved in the NAACP. So Governor Greening himself is kind of more of a progressive politician at the time, and he listens to these letters by Native activists and decides that it is fascist to segregate Native people. So he's kind of on board with changing the climate of the Alaskan territory. That being said, he doesn't want to recognize Aboriginal land rights. So there's kind of this interesting way in which Greening is progressive, but he's not fully on board with recognizing Aboriginal land rights. Yeah. But great question. Yeah. And in terms of why Alaska and Native rights, honestly, this is just kind of a wild guess here. There is a lot to be said about anti-Blackness in the history of the United States. And while there are forms of anti-indigeneity, even Chinese exclusion at the end of the 19th century, so kind of anti-Asian sentiments, these are all forms of discrimination, but anti-Blackness is very strong, right? And so it's possible that kind of different populations, different regions would also have a history just because of different attitudes.
Yeah, Dr. Guise, thanks for coming. I teach language arts to 7th graders, and we took the opportunity to talk about Elizabeth Peratrovich yesterday because of the day, and 6 of my students are here right now listening as an alternative to answering some questions about we watched parts of the video for the rights of all ending Jim Crow in Alaska. And so anyway, it's really fortunate for us to have you come in and continue this discussion. I was just listening to you talk about Governor Greening, and this discussion about Elizabeth Peratrovich has got me more interested in him, and I didn't know much about him, and made me wonder if some of the publicity or the news coming out of Germany and the concentration camps made it more possible for anti-discrimination laws or the law to be passed, or I wonder if that played into it or not. And I don't know if you know, and it just makes me wonder, as people are realizing what's happening in Germany, that maybe we should get our act together more.
That's a great question. Yeah, thank you so much for that question. From what I've seen from, I'm having an internet connection unstable. Can you all see me? Okay, good. So from what I've read from the letters, because I've read kind of the activist letters from Roy Peratrovich and also Walter Soboleff, who was involved in the Alaska Native Brotherhood, to some of these letters to Governor Greening and Anthony Diamond, right? And they very much do cite Nazi Germany during this time period. So there is an awareness of what's going on in Nazi Germany. How much do they know is going on? I don't know, right? But they are aware of kind of like the fascism that's existing abroad. And in a way, they're proposing that this equality should exist because we aren't in a fascist country. So they're kind of saying that like Native men are into the armed forces, they're serving abroad overseas, they're part of the fight against fascism. And so Native people should have equality too. A concept that is kind of a good one to know about is the double victory campaign. There's been some historians who write about this concept of the double victory campaign, specifically with the Black community. So like African Americans serving in platoons, even if they were segregated, were fighting for victory abroad and also victory on the home front. So there's a way in which kind of these marginalized populations in the mid 20th century are choosing military service or kind of choosing alliance with the United States, even if they're oppressed, because they're trying to gain victory on the home front as well. And so we do see how kind of Nazi Germany is seen as what can happen, right? And why they're kind of fighting against fascism globally and hopefully fascism within their own towns too.
Thank you, Dr. Guise. Mr. Beer has his hand up. Mr. B, do you have a question for Dr. Guise?
Yeah, I was just wondering, this is more of a subjective question for you. What would be kind of the best way for myself or maybe the students watching to kind of honor the Peratrovich Day? What would be some things that we could do, maybe planning for next year as well, just kind of things that we could do at STrEaM to really raise awareness or to honor her memory?
That's a great question. What can we do to honor Elizabeth Peratrovich Day and to engage the students? I love that. So something I saw on Twitter was, I think someone who works for the National Park Service was saying that they were going to purchase the Alaska Peratrovich coins, and kind of give them out to friends or whoever. I kind of like that because that's kind of cool, but it also costs money. But as a historian, I like the idea of having students look at the primary documents. So if you go to the Alaska Digital Archives, I think it's like vilda.alaska.edu. I might have messed that up, but it's the Alaska Digital Archives. You can pull up some of these documents that are digitized, that are original newspaper clippings from when the act passed, and even things from that era, photographs of Elizabeth Peratrovich and Governor Greening kind of signing the Alaska Equal Rights Act. And I think it would be great to have students look at those documents and kind of come up with their own interpretations of the time period, and that could range from anything of like the fashion during that time period, right, which is very obscure, to just like the tone of the article or the attitudes in the article or things that they find interesting in these primary documents. And I like it because it makes us all kind of historians, right? Like that's what we do as historians. Like we look at these primary documents and we come up with our own interpretations and our analysis of the text. So hopefully that would be something to engage the students.
We got a suggestion. Thank you, Dr. Guise. Those are great ideas. And we have a parent, Kate Cannon, who works in the Indian Ed department at one of our elementary schools, and she said that in Fairbanks, they have a poster contest for Elizabeth Peratrovich Day. Their students participate in trying to create, and there's some really cool poster like work out there that you can see that I've seen just in the recent couple of days. So that's a good idea. I think that's something I might see if we can pursue next year as an Elizabeth Peratrovich Day poster contest. And then the other suggestion she gave that I wanted to share was that they ask students 3 questions. Because of Elizabeth, I can. Because of Elizabeth, my friends can. And because of Elizabeth, my family can. And they just ask, find answers to those 3 questions. What can you do? Can your friends do? Can your family do now because of Elizabeth Peratrovich? So I thought those are some awesome suggestions to add to, answer Mr. B's question. Do we have other questions for Dr. Guise or just even anything else anything I failed to ask her about that we want to hear more from Dr. Guise about? I don't see any hands up or anybody jumping in.
I have one.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Ms. Smith.
I don't know if I've missed it, but we're doing a little bit of art history and analysis of art movements. And of course, her being pictured here on the Rosie the Riveter cover here. And we're going to do a bit about Rosie the Riveter, who she was, what that icon is all about, and then make some connections between what does it mean that she's depicted this way, and wondering what you might have to say about that as well.
Fascinating. Oh, I like that. I like the idea of kind of, it's very art history approach, right? In terms of looking at the imagery and the symbolism and what that means and kind of indigenizing, right? Because from the literature I've read about World War II time period, Rosie the Riveter is also kind of also depicted as a white woman, right? And here we have a Native woman, right? Kind of with this imagery. So I love the idea of kind of looking at the significance of Rosie the Riveter and Elizabeth Peratrovich during this time period. Mm-hmm. It's also very like pre-Cold War, you know, like we have to look at kind of the history of the 20th century because like we have these very empowering images of women that are printed in propaganda, right? But then during the Cold War, we see the shift of women not in the workforce and kind of propaganda pushing women more towards home life. So the 40s is a really interesting time in terms of like advocating for women in the workplace. Right. And then during the Cold War era, which is decades, right? We basically see kind of, we don't see these kind of empowering images about women in the workplace. Mm-hmm. So also like how these depictions of gender change over decades and change, right?
Awesome. Thank you. Dr. Guise, this might not be fair to ask a scholar because you have so much awesome information and knowledge to share and insight into Elizabeth Peratrovich. But I guess a closing question would be, if you had to give the elevator speech, you're in an elevator and you're riding up, 5 floors with someone, and they say, "Who? Elizabeth Peratrovich? Who's that?" What would that elevator speech be? What's the synopsis we can give to really capture the essence and the importance and the impact that Elizabeth Peratrovich had?
Great question. So like if we had a sentence to kind of summarize Elizabeth Peratrovich, I'd say she was a Native activist, leader of the Alaska Native Sisterhood. She was a bridge leader in the community, providing resources for Native families, extending educational equality to Native children, and creating more opportunities within Native home life, right? And so I kind of see her as a community activist and also an activist for Native rights during this time period. And she's well liked. I mean, we have to appreciate how people kind of followed her and lifted her up as a leader, right? And that Native people appreciated her. And she was even creating Alaska Native Brotherhood organizations in Northern Alaska in Inupiat territories. So she's kind of going beyond just the boundaries of her own tribal nation, and she's reaching Native people from other regions. Of vast geographies. People forget how large Alaska is, but if you think about the Inupiat people here and Southeast Alaska, it's like comparing tribal nations in the continental US from like across the whole country, right? So it's really pretty impressive that she was networking so much with other Native people and also within Southeast Alaska.
That is impressive. That is pretty amazing. In a time where we didn't have nearly the communication tools that we have now. I mean, she had to get into airplanes and fly to these other places and touch down in villages and talk with people. And it's pretty powerful that she was able to have that impact. I think that's a great summary. I think that's a great takeaway for us. If we want a starting point to talk about Elizabeth Peratrovich. So thank you for that. And I'm going to go back when I watch later and try to capture that and put some quotes around it. Gosh, I had another question. Oh, just to follow up on the likability part, to get so many different people from different walks of lives, different cultures, different Alaska Native cultures and communities, not to mention, the establishment and the powers in Juneau to get all of these different people to listen to her and to convince them, to go along with this agenda and to support to support her agenda and support what she was trying to accomplish, to give that speech, as you put it, in terms, colonial terms that, the people in the Senate could understand. What an incredible communicator. And I like that you point out like that she had to be likable. She was a likable person. She was a powerful personality. People must have liked her because they listened to her. So that's a neat insight. Well, I don't want to keep Dr. Guise much longer. If anyone has another question, make sure you hop in now before we let Dr. Guise go about her busy day. Dr. Guise, do you have any closing thoughts or any kind of final things you wanted to share with us?
I just wanted to say thank you for having me visit today. I have a lot of fun visiting with Anchorage STrEAM Academy, and thank you for the invitation. I think it's wonderful. We're learning about Alaska history, Alaska Native history too. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Guise. We are so appreciative that you spent some time with us again. And I hope we can continue this in the future and continue to work with you and tap into your knowledge. Please continue to share your book suggestions, and also, as you're working on and publishing your next research and your future projects, keep us in mind. We'd love to stay in touch with that and just continue to learn more about our history and the awesome things that you have to share. Thank you so much for joining us today. We loved having you on. We appreciate it. Happy Elizabeth Peratrovich Day, and hopefully we'll have you on again soon.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Awesome. That was pretty amazing, folks. I'm gonna switch gears and pull my slides back up. That was Dr. Holly Guise joining us to share her knowledge about Elizabeth Peratrovich and give us some insights on Elizabeth Peratrovich Day. It's pretty cool. Pretty cool. What do you think, Mrs. Beyondich? Was that all that we thought it was going to be?
Yeah, I'm super excited to be a historian, and now I'm inspired to go look at original documents. Thanks to Dr. Guise. She's an amazingly smart person. I love talking with her.
Yeah, she's pretty incredible, and it's pretty cool that we've got to have her on for two topics that she's got a lot of expertise in. The Veterans Day, and talking about and Alaska Native history or Native American History Month. Those things coincided back in November when we had her on, and she talked about her research on Alaska Natives in World War II. And then now to have her on to talk about Elizabeth Peratrovich is pretty cool, pretty powerful. All right, what else do we have on tap today? Really, we had most of our time today dedicated to that topic. Mrs. Beyondich, do you want to switch gears and give an update on our nonprofit arm, our 501c3?
Sure. So the 501c3 is meeting again tomorrow at 5 o'clock. If you're interested in attending, all you have to do is call me. I'll get you the link. I'll shoot it to your email. We're talking about different and easy ways to support Anchorage STrEAM Academy through fundraising. And a very easy way to support our school is to connect STrEAM Anchorage as your donation for Amazon Smile and the Fred Meyer Community Rewards. So we encourage you to do that, because that's a very easy way to just secretly slip us money. You don't even have to think about it. Also, Pita Pit, Anchorage Pita Pit has 3 locations, and on Sundays during the winter, they do pitas for a purpose. Pitas for a purpose is any purchase that is made at any of the 3 Pita Pit locations in Anchorage. 10% of that goes to the charity of their choice, And STrEAM Anchorage is the charity of their choice for March 28th. So make sure you go buy a pita at Pita Pit on March.
Mark your calendars.
Mark your calendars, yes, because 10% of all of their purchases go to STrEAM Anchorage, specifically toward our cross country. We're going to target this donation to our cross country team. We're also planning a fundraiser that's a basket auction. We're still in the very early stages. We had tried to do this last year, and the closing of the schools to in-person learning caused us to delay that. So we're going to pick back up where we were. We're going to add an element of online bidding, and we're going to have a basket auction in the spring sometime. And that's really what the focus of tomorrow night's meeting is going to be about. So if you have ideas, if you are interested in fundraising, if you want to help me do the taxes for the 501, let's come to that meeting, and we will start a discussion on how you can help us raise money for Anchorage STrEAM Academy.
Awesome. Thank you. How about Mr. Mosen? Are you still with us, Coach? Do you want to talk about ski club? Where are we at with ski club?
Well, it's been an amazing success. We are down to 2 days this week and 3 days next week, averaging 20 students a day. And I don't want to jinx it, but everyone's made it back so far, safe and healthy. And now we're starting to think what we want to do in the spring. Maybe a bike club or something, so it's been, the students and parents have been so easy to work with and positive that now we're looking for ideas on how we can do a club or a team this spring. So just looking for ideas, and I'm thinking, biking seems like a good one. Hiking, maybe, it's some sort of adventure, hiking or biking. So
Venture club.
Yeah. So let's think on that, and we'll stay strong for the rest of we have 5 more practices with ski club, or 5 more meetings.
Five more meetings. Yeah. Where is ski club meet today, Coach?
Good question. We're meeting at the Campbell Airstrip Trailhead.
Campbell Airstrip Trailhead.
Coach Perkins and I are there every day, and we've had a lot of great adult volunteer support every day. So
awesome. I love ski club. So glad that you and Coach Perkins are doing this, and that we've got 20 kids that are getting out there skiing. That's super cool. Only 5 meets, 5 skis left. So let's get them. Let's go get it. Yeah. What else do we have for updates? Any staff that want to jump in and give us an update, let me know. I do want to remind folks that the lottery is open. I want to implore staff, APC members, and parents to please continue to share. Your social media shares mean so much to us. Get the word out about STrEAM Academy, because the number one way we recruit and build our, continue to build our student base is through word of mouth. And each of you is the center of a web. Each of you has a vast interconnected network of people. And the nice thing about social media is you can all get your word out to that entire web. You never know who, it might touch when you share. So please, when Mrs. Bionich puts these beautiful posts together on our Facebook page saying, hey, the lottery's open, and the quotes that people that she's gathering, that people are sharing about our school and their experience, please just do us a favor. We're asking very nicely, imploring you, please just hit the share button. Just hit share. You don't have to say anything, just share it, and it'll touch your entire web of people and get out there and spread the good word about STREAM Academy. That's what we're asking everyone to do. Lottery is open. We have some strong numbers in the lottery, but we would certainly like to continue to build that lottery up. The lottery closes on the 18th of March, so just through spring break into that first week back. And then we have some time to take a look at the lottery and balance it out and do what we need to do. And notifications start going out to parents on the 26th of March. Do you want to say anything else about the lottery, Mrs. Beyondich?
I just want to add that we're looking for testimonials from all of our stakeholders, whether you're a parent, a community member, whether you're a student, if you're a teacher, anything, any way that you're connected, any way that you're a stakeholder. We're looking for 2 or 3 sentences that we can add to our testimonial campaign. That's the campaign that looks like a book. Those testimonials are attached to our website, and we are adding to them every time we receive another testimonial. So just email me a few sentences and I'll add you to our testimonial book.
Awesome. Thank you. Ms. Kotelman, I wanted to give you a chance. I know I didn't ask you necessarily to have to present today because we wanted to dedicate most of the time to Dr. Guise. Do you want to give any kind of a quick update on assessment or anything, parents should know or students should be aware of?
I mean, I guess I could do the presentation that I prepared, or I could just let you guys know that our mastery scale presentation could be next week. I think that might be good. I'd rather let them chew on the Peratrovich stuff than fill brain with more grading and assessment.
Mastery presentation next week.
So yeah, we're going to talk about the mastery scale and the ever-present question from parents. If my student got 40%, why do they have a C? We'll talk about it.
That's a great question.
It's all made up. It's all made up.
That's a great preview for next week. We're going to have a great morning coffee next week. Next week on morning coffee. What do we have next week on morning coffee, Mrs. Beyondich? We have our outdoor education focus next week on morning coffee. We have Aaron Kirkland joining us from Anchorage Parks and probably, hopefully Miss Gatlin as well to talk about outdoor educational opportunities. That's going to be a good bit. We have our 8th grade teachers, Miss Goodman and Mrs. Smith presenting, telling us what's happening in 8th grade. We have our mastery scale presentation from Ms. Kotelman to learn more about the mastery scale. And it also will sort of set up our virtual open house that night. So a big week next week, a big Wednesday next week.
I'm really excited about our open house that we get to show off our school. And we're going to show our recruitment video again, which is available on YouTube. So on the same YouTube channel that Morning Coffee and our APC meetings are, you can preview our recruitment video. Share that with everyone you know. I popped it even to my mom so she could see it.
Yeah, the recruitment video turned out really, really nice. And thank you for everyone that's shared that. And that's everyone that contributed to that. It was pretty cool. Miss Kotelman's on there. Coach Mosen's on there. Yeah. All right. Anything for the good of the order? Anything that anyone wants to ask or share before we wrap up morning coffee today?
I want to thank Coach Mosen and Perkins for inviting their 7th graders to come and join us this morning. It's always lovely when students pop in and we can see them and share with them. And I'm really glad that they did that. That was great fun. So thank you for that, Knights of STrEAM. I appreciate you.
The Knights of STrEAM. I concur. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. It was an awesome morning coffee, and I'm super appreciative. I want to finish once again by saying thank you to Dr. Guise for her presentation. It was really cool, and I learned a lot every time she comes on. I learn a lot. I think we all do. It was really nice to have her share her expertise and her research on Elizabeth Peratrovich. Thank you, everyone, for attending today. Thank you for those who came on Zoom and those who watched us on YouTube or are watching us later on YouTube. This has been Morning Coffee with Anchorage STrEAM Academy. And I want to close by reminding you, get outside every day.